Welcome to another video tutorial. In this video, I'm going to focus on a couple of methods that you can use to optimize larger maps. So I've set up a map just for the quick example. It's not, and it's certainly not a map that needs to be optimized, but it's just to show you the principles in play. So I've basically quickly thrown together a small sort of city park scene. So I've got a couple of buildings, park benches, some bushes, and then over here is like a pond with some park benches around it. And then I've got a couple of offshoot areas over here. I've got one that's just a quick throw together of some grass tiles and a bush. I'll talk about why I've done that in a minute. And another park area over here, which is, just a pond park area over there. So there's two ways which you can optimize your map. It all depends on what your needs are. So depending on the sort of why you're making a large map, there could be a couple of reasons. First of all, you might just be making a large exterior. So that's what this is kind of emulating here. We've got two areas which could be large and therefore demanding on the CPU. We've got a pond area over here. We've got a sort of urban park area over here. Or you might have it so that you've got different areas in the same map. So, for example, you might have a town divided into two parts. You know, this is the first part of your town, and then over here is the other part of your town, and then in your map you sort of teleport between the two. So I'm going to show you in this video how to optimize the two types of map depending on what you're doing. So there's two ways you can go about it. So let's start with the teleport because it's sort of the quickest and the easiest, and it builds upon something which I've already covered in the video I did about houses, because it's kind of the same. It's going to use the same method but just done in a different way. We're going to use the auto hide groups. So what we're going to do first of all is I'm just going to go underneath the map here. So I can just grab the tiles because you don't really need the buildings. As long as you've got all the tiles, then if you hide tiles, all the objects and characters that are on the tiles will get hidden anyway. So you don't really need to select everything. You just have to select all the tiles. I'm just going to select, whoops, and this needs to be box mode. I'm just going to select the whole floor area of this area here. Make sure it's all selected. And I'm going to add this to a group. So I'm going to press the G key and I'm going to add it to a group. Let's call this Urban Park, because that's essentially what it is. And then we'll deselect the group. And then just for now, we'll come over to here. But really, you would actually make it that section over there, but we'll come back to that. And I'm just going to quickly now select all the tiles in this little offshoot. I'm going to add those to a group, and we'll just call this small park. So we've got two groups. We've got a urban park, which is all of these. In fact, I can show you. Let's go down to the groups. So we've got urban park, which is all of these tiles here. And then if we deselect those, we've got small park, which is then all of these. So what we want to do is we want to make it so that when we're in urban park, this is not visible. And then when we're in small park, this is not visible. And by the way, it has been confirmed. I could show in this video, but I don't feel I need to. But it has been confirmed that if you hide groups, it does actually free up the CPU. So it will have an effect on your performance. So it's not, when you hide groups, it is actually unloading them as well. So that's what we want to do. We want it so that when we're in this group, these are invisible or invisible, unloaded. And when we're in this group is invisible. So what we need to do first of all is reselect an urban park. And I'm actually going to deselect this tile here, because we need a tile that's basically going to act as the bridge between the two groups. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to walk anywhere that sort of does anything because it will be invisible. So I'm going to hold the Alt and the Shift key, and I'm just going to click this tile here. This is basically going to be the transition tile. So I'm going to walk into this tile, and it's going to take me to this group here. And with this group now selected, so this is the whole of Urban Park minus this one tile, I'm now going to add these to a second group. And I'm going to call this group Small Park, because that's what I called this group, minus Hide. So that means that now when I'm in this group, but not this one because it's not in the group, but when I'm in this group, this will not be visible. Let's deselect that. And now we're going to do the same with Small Park. We're going to select everything, but I'm going to hold Alt, Shift, and click on this tile. And I just had one path tile just to show you that this is where we're basically going to teleport to. And I'm going to add these to a group, and this is going to be called Urban Park Hide. So that when we're in this group, Urban Park group will be hidden. So the only other thing we need to do now is bridge the two. So for that, what I'm going to do is just a quick, simple script. So I'm just going to select this tile, go down to scripts, and I've actually already got it. It's Area 2 Transition. I would have created this if it wasn't here, but basically all it's going to do is it's going to fade out for 3 seconds, and then it's going to put the player on this tile here. So I've got the coordinates here. That's this tile. So it's basically going to fade out, move us to there, and then fade us in as well. So let's save that. That should actually be enough to work now. And we'll check it works, and then when it works, hopefully it does, I'll quickly explain why it's working. So let's load the game. So what you'll see, if we zoom out a bit, as we move forward, you can see that there is a floating tile there. That's because that tile was not in the hide group, right? I will explain how to deal with that in a moment, but let's just test that it works. We want to walk onto this tile, and we want to be put here, and we want the whole city to unload. Not the whole city, but the whole urban area. And there we go. So you can see it's now flipped. So now we've got one tile that's floating where the urban area was, but now we can walk around the park. And as the CPU would have shot up now because it's not rendering those buildings and those bushes and those benches and the pond. All of that's been unloaded now except for this tile here. So let's go back to the editor. So the reason that works is because the moment we teleport onto this tile here, we're then in a group called Small Park. And we've told it that when we're in a group called Small Park, all of this should be unloaded. And that's what happens. So when we get teleported to here, it automatically, there's no scripting involved with auto hide groups. That's the great thing about it. You do have to script the teleporting, but in terms of walking in and out of these groups, it does it for you. So how do we deal with the fact, though, that we've got these sort of two floating tiles? Well, the reason for that is because there's no real way to sort of hide them other than make sure that your areas are further away. So for example, let's now group these together, and I'll call this, what should we call this? Let's call this Small Pond. Okay, so there's our Small Pond group, and while I'm here, I may as well Alt-Shift, select that. This is going to be added to the group Urban Park Hide, so that when we're in this group, it hides the skyscrapers and the benches and everything. And then what we want to do is reselect Urban Park Hide, I think it is, or no, so Small Park Hide, reselect that. And we'll also add that to a group called Small Pond Hide. So now we just basically flipped it round. So we've now got a group that when we're in this area, this will be invisible. And when we're in that area, this will be invisible. And all we'll do is we'll quickly select this tile here, copy the XYZ coordinates, go to my script for area 2 transition, and we'll just amend this coordinate. And just in case, I'll make that tile and OK, and save. And just so that we don't have a floating tile, I'm going to select all of these. In fact, let's do it this way. I can select small park and hide it, so then it's invisible in game, because we're not going there at all now. So let's now save that and play test. Let's zoom out a bit. So now you can see there's no floating tile because this whole group has been hidden. However, if I was able to angle the camera, which I don't think I can, and I can't zoom out anymore, if I was able to angle the camera maybe a bit more flat, you might be able to see off in the distance there is that one floating tile. But because it's off in the distance and the camera can't get to it because it's attached to the player, you can't see that there's a floating tile. So now if we walk onto this tile and it loads the pond, it's now unloaded the city in the background, but because again the city is far enough away that you can't see it, you don't get the effect of floating transition tiles. Yeah, there you go. You can kind of, actually, what is that? Is that the pond? Oh, yeah, what it's done is it's shown again the small pond, which, yeah. I don't know why it did that, but that's probably because it's not in this hide group. But we wouldn't have that anyway, because this group would be, let's show it again. You would get rid of that group. So if I was to delete it, because we actually don't need that group, that was there just to show you the effect of it working. But let's just save the map, test it one more time, just to make sure it is behaving as it should. So we'll zoom out again. Nothing to see. We're just in one single area at the moment. Let's move on to the transition tile. And then it loads this area, and you should be able to see there's nothing. No green. Let's go to the edge. Can't see anything. So it literally has unloaded all the other areas but this one. And obviously what you would want to do, which I haven't done, is you'd want to make it so that when you're on this tile, it fades out, moves you back to the city, and, you know, unload, and it will automatically unload this area because you're back in the city again, and it will show the city. So that's auto hide groups, and that's great for when, as I say, you have different sections of the map separated but in the same map file. So that can be good. This can be a good way of making, so for example, the reasons why you might want to use this if you want to load different areas but without a loading screen. So this might be why you have different areas. You might have interiors, for example, that are different sections. So this could be the inside of a building, for example, that you've just moved to rather than gone into the building directly. But you also don't want to load a second map for every building. So you might actually have the interiors off to one side in the main map. So what you can do is you can make it so that when you're in an interior of a building, the outside is not rendered. Or you can make it so that when you're in a different area of your map, the area you've just been in gets unrendered. Yeah. So this is one way that you can do this if you're using small sections of the map, but in the same map file. Okay. Let's go back to the editor, and now let's deal with the more complicated issue of what if you're not using separate areas of the map scattered around your map file. What if you're actually using one big continuous map that you just want to optimize as you walk around? So I'm going to show you one way in which we're going to do this. So what I've deliberately done here, as I say, is I've built two areas which you could argue if there were more condensely packed with items and were a bit bigger, these could be two areas which could be quite heavy on the CPU, and you might not want them showing at the same time in memory, right? So what we want to do is we want to make it so that when we're in this area, we see these buildings, and then when we move into this area, we see the pond, but we don't see the buildings. So for this, I'm going to delete all the groups because we don't need the hide groups anymore. We're going to do this a very different way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select just the building section. So that's all of this here. And I'm going to add those to a group. And I'll just call this urban path, let's say, because that's basically what it is. It's the urban part of the map with the path running down the side. Then we'll select, let's just reselect that again just so I can see. Right, so I don't want that, I don't want that, so I want this. So I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to add those to a group called pond area, let's say. Just call it pond area again. So what we've got, just to show you again, we've got two groups so far. We've got an urban path, which is all of those tiles, and we've got a pond area, which is all of those tiles. But what you can see is that I've left two tiles in between that are not in either group. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select all of these tiles, the ones running down nearest this group, and I'm going to add those to a group which I'm going to call buffer zone 1. And then I'm going to select all of these tiles, and I'm going to add those to a group which I'm going to call buffer zone 2. By the way, you can name these groups whatever you want. I'm just calling them that because it's how I'm going to use them. Essentially, these are going to be buffers. So what we want to do is we want to make it so that when we're in this buffer zone, let me get it straight in my mind. I've got the scripts here. This is the reason why I kept the scripts, is so I didn't get confused. So let's load buffer zone 1. What does buffer zone 1 do? It hides, right, so when you're in buffer zone 1, which is this group here, it hides the pond and shows the city. And then when you're in this group, it's going to hide the city and show the pond. So as you move towards the pond, it will show the pond and unload the city. And then as you walk back, it will hide the pond and show the city. So in order to achieve this, we need 3 scripts. First script is what happens when you're in buffer zone 1, where we want to hide the group pond area and we want to show the group city park. We need to rename that because that's the old name. I called it urban path, didn't I? So that's correct now for the actual group name, so we'll save that. And then in buffer zone 2 script, it's the flip. So it hides urban path and shows pond area. Okay. Now comes the slightly more complicated third script. Okay, because there's 2 ways you could go about this. There's the laborious way, or there's the much easier script way. The laborious way is we could select these tile by tile, go into the properties and assign buffer zone 1 to all the tiles in the group buffer zone 1. That's far too long-winded for what you can do if you just do a script. So we're going to do a script that automatically does that for us. So I'm going to say none to that. So no scripts have been set on any tiles. I'm going to make a third script. I'm going to go to the script editor, make a new script, which I'll call assign buffer scripts. And what this is going to do is this is going to do a for loop. So double click for loop. And I'm going to name the variable tile. And the group is going to be, first of all, buffer zone 1. I'm just going to double check that absolutely what I called the group, otherwise that's not going to work. So let's go to map properties, So we're basically saying, why has it done that? Why has it, this happened before, it missed the E off. I think this is a bug. So go into the actual script language and type E. Don't know why it missed the E off in the box side, but I typed it correctly in the for loop. Anyway, watch for that, because that's, you could run aground with that if Justin's watching this. So what we want to do is add a I forget the command. What is it? An assign script, or is it set entity script? That's the one. I'll go over this again in a minute. So I'm just being thrown by a couple of these minor quibbles. Right. So what we want to do is the entity is going to be our variable. So the entity by ID, and I'm just going to make that $tile. Again, just check in the box site that that is right. Yep. The script is going to be buffer zone 1 and trigger when character enters tile. And then we need to just duplicate this. Is that right? Oh no, sorry, duplicate this. And this goes at the end. Zoom in. Drag that there. So that at the end of that for loop, it does another one. But this one is going to go through the second group. And it's going to do the same thing, but with the other scripts. So we'll copy that one. So we want to change this to buffer zone 2. So let's just quickly go over this script just so that I'm going through it properly. So what this script is basically doing is it's basically doing 2 for loops. It's looping through all the tiles in the first group, buffer zone 1, and it's storing them in this variable, $tile. And it's basically saying for every tile in this group, set the script buffer zone 1 on that tile, and make it so that when you enter the tile, it does that script. And then do another for loop, which is the other group. So in buffer zone 2, for every tile, set the script buffer zone 2 on those tiles when you enter the tile. So what that means is in-game, it will automatically have assigned all the right scripts to these tiles without me having to do it in the editor. The only other thing we need to do, though, is we need to make sure that happens, because at the moment, this is a standalone script. It's not going to do anything by itself. So I'm just going to load up the startup script. And at the very end, I'm going to add an execute script command. So after it's loaded the map, I want it to execute script. And I want it to execute assign buffer scripts. So it will then do that once the map's loaded. What we also want to do is hide the group that we're not starting in. So I'm just going to add a hide group so that at the very beginning it hides pond area. So that's also hidden when we load the map. Okay, because we're starting, the start of our starting position is here. So we want this to be unloaded when we load the map. So before we test, let's just quickly summarize what we've done, just so that if you've been struggling to keep up, I'll just quickly go over this in case you've missed anything. So I've created a multitude of groups, 4 groups I think in total. So the first one is earthen path, and that's basically everything that I want to be in one group that gets unloaded. So in this case, all the benches, the buildings, all of that stuff, the bushes. Then I've created a second group called pond area, which is the other set of tiles that I want to be sort of toggled between. So in this case, the benches, the ponds, that sort of thing. So these two I basically want to unload and load as I move around. And then I've created 2 more groups in the middle, the buffer zones, and I've divided them up into further 2 groups. So there's not just one group called buffer zone. There's a buffer zone 1, which is near this group over here. And then there's a buffer zone 2, which is near this group. And that's because buffer zone 1 is going to do something very different to buffer zone 2. We need it so that when we're in this group, this loads and this unloads, or whichever one it is, it's one of them. When you're closest to the buildings, we want the buildings to load, and when we're furthest away from the pond, we want the pond to disappear. So this is going to hide the pond and show the buildings. This one is going to hide the buildings and show the pond, okay? So let's just quickly give that a test. And the way that's working is we've got scripts on these buffer zones that are doing that. This script is going to hide one group, show the other, and then the other script does the flip. And then, as I say, we've got a script which gets executed at startup called assign buffer scripts. And what that script does is that just loops through all the tiles, first of all, in this group, and assigns them that script for that group for all of those tiles. And then it will do the same with the next group, assigning those tiles automatically. So it just takes the work out of meticulously tile by tile by tile by tile, assigning the scripts through the interface. So let's give that a test and see how it works. So here we are in the map, and you can see that the pond area is not visible. Okay, we've just got the urban path area. However, if we now walk towards the pond, the urban area gets unloaded, and we now see the pond, the benches, and all of that. And if we walk back, and we can test it's done all the tiles, because I can walk forward, let's say this way, you can see that it then unloads all of the pond tiles and loads the urban area. Now, this is a very simplistic implementation just to show you, A, how to do it, and B, that it does work. You can see it is, as I move back and forth, it is actually toggling between the visibility of the groups. And it will, in doing so, unload the skyscrapers, so they're not in memory anymore. And now it will unload the pond, so that's not in memory anymore. So it can be used as a way to preserve CPU load on larger maps. However, if you are actually going to use this properly, you might not want the player to be able to see the effect of the area unloading and loading in front of them. You might want it, in which case this is how you do it. You have just two tiles, and as you move back and forth between them, it unloads and loads the areas on either side. However, you might not want the player who's playing your game to know that's happening, and you want it to be more behind the scenes. The way to do that is just to make your buffer zone, these two tiles here, larger. Okay, so just to sort of better explain what I was talking about with kind of making this work, I've just enlarged the map a bit more. So what I have here now is some groups. Obviously, we've got urban path, which is that area there. That's the one area that I want either unloading or loading, depending on where I am. Then we've got our pond area. So let's just deselect urban path. Then we've got our pond area, which is this over here. You'll notice we've got this area in the middle, which is just flat land with some trees. I'm not saying you have to make it this level of basic, but you know, I'm just saying it's slightly less detailed necessarily than the area on either side. For example, it might just be some tiles, you know, rather than objects. It might just be like you're walking through a canyon or something like that, you know. So the player is quite sort of restricted at this moment, so they can't necessarily see what's on either side. But you'll also notice that, let me just select the groups again. Although I've got this area on either side, which is completely ungrouped, my buffer zones are in the middle of that group. Yeah. So let's just select everything again, just so it's clearer what I mean. So I've got the two groups, and I've got the buffer zone, if you will, or buffer area in the middle, but the actual loading happens in the middle of the buffer zone. So in fact, I probably should move those one over, but it doesn't matter. Okay. So what it means is that it will unload this area and load this area while you're in the middle of this area. So you shouldn't really see it happening because you're still in the middle of an area that's not being unloaded or loaded, if that makes sense. So let's just give this a test, because I've given everything the same name, so the scripts should still work. But now it should be slightly harder to see that there's not a pond area. Obviously, if I zoom really far out, you can see there isn't. So you might want to sort of limit the camera zoom, for example, in games that do this. But as you can see, that obviously the issue at the moment is that as I get closer to the edge, there you go, you can still see it a bit, and that's because the buffer zone area still is a bit too small. So you're going to have to experiment with this concept, but it is a useful thing to do because it can free up resources. But this is how you do it. So as you walk through this area, it's sort of less immediate, if you know what I mean. It's not happening right in front of your face. It is actually happening a bit further forwards. So it's already a better effect than it was when it was just 2 tiles in front of you. But you also might want to make the buffer zone a bit larger so you don't even see it happening. But that's up to you to experiment with. So hopefully this video has been, first of all, made sense. And hopefully it was interesting and useful for you. And hope that this helps make larger maps more optimized for you. So that said, I'll wrap this video up. Thanks for watching.